President Trump is doubling down on his calls for NATO members to spend what he says is their fair share on defense. The call comes about a week before the president is set to meet with key allies at the annual NATO summit in Brussels. Major Garrett reports from the White House.
Ahead of next week's NATO summit in Brussels, President Trump sent a letter to the Prime Minister of Norway that made clear he will not relent on his criticism of NATO allies' lagging defense budgets. Norway, the president wrote, remains the only NATO ally sharing a border with Russia that lacks a credible plan to spend 2% of its gross domestic product on defense. Norway is far from alone, and the president has reportedly sent similar letters to other countries. Of the 28 NATO nations, only 3 besides the United States spent the promised 2% of GDP on defense last year. Throughout his presidency, Mr. Trump has prodded NATO nations to spend more,
which many of them have not been doing. Many of them have not been even close.
European allies are hoping next week's summit goes better than last month's G7 meeting in Canada. That meeting was marked by tense exchanges between Mr. Trump and other world leaders over trade.
If the expectation was that a weekend in beautiful Charlevoix, surrounded by all sorts of lovely people, was going to transform the president's outlook on trade in the world, then we didn't quite perhaps meet that bar.
Since then, the trade war has only ratcheted up. Harley-Davidson announced it would move some U.S. motorcycle production overseas to avoid European tariffs. And Canada announced retaliatory tariffs on more than $12 billion worth of U.S. imports.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett is at the White House. So, Major, the president's frustration with NATO spending is not new, but what's different now?
That it is more specific, and it's happening in proximity to his first scheduled meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And Europeans, almost universally, are nervous about 2 trend lines of the Trump presidency. One, this movement that seems inexorable toward a trade war. Lingering trade disputes are now becoming manifest in tariffs and counter-tariffs. That's one dispute. And this long-running dispute over NATO member nations failing to meet their pledged 2% of GDP expenditure on defense. Now, the president is correct when he says many nations are lagging, and they've promised for many, many years to live up to this. None of that is factually incorrect. European leaders and their parliaments or political entities often counter, yes, we've made that pledge, but we have other political realities we have to deal with that you have to take into account, President Trump. President Trump says, look, I've expended my own political capital to get defense spending in the United States. You need to do the same. So what's different about NATO grievances, long expressed by Donald Trump as a candidate and as president, is they're now right alongside his trade disputes and what looks to be the beginnings of a trade war. And all of that is a prelude to a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And the Europeans look at Putin and say, he is licking his chops metaphorically at what appears to be these 2 lines of disunity between the United States and Europe. And they, meaning the Europeans, are fearful that Russia will try to exploit those differences, number one, and then number 2, take advantage of them economically or in other ways if it can.
I want to ask you more about Putin in a minute, but first, is there any concern within the White House that these letters regarding NATO countries' spending could further alienate the U.S. from its allies?
If there is concern, it is taking a back seat to the president's hardline stance on this. And the administration argues, look, disunity in pursuit of stronger defense spending throughout Europe is worth the price, because if you in fact have stronger defense budgets and a stronger, more robust NATO common defense alliance, that's bad for Russia. So the administration argues we can quarrel about this now, but if the quarrel leads to more robust defense spending and a stronger alliance that can not only say it's going to do things but militarily back those statements up, then everything between the United States and Europe over time is stronger and Russia is comparatively weaker. What is the test for this administration is taking that quarrel to that next level, meaning not more quarrelsome, but getting higher defense spending and a stronger military alliance within NATO. That's a push. President Trump is not the first American president to attempt that push, but he is making that push a much more public spectacle than ever before.
Well, this comes ahead of the president's upcoming meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. I guess the question, Major, is given the appearance of what some would say is a crack in the NATO alliance, or what could be perceived as a crack in the NATO alliance, how much of this is a win, a public relations win already for Vladimir Putin and for Russia?
Well, the summit itself is a gain, a net victory for Vladimir Putin, because according to the United States intelligence community, he ordered malevolent interference in the 2016 election and has paid no discernible price other than sanctions imposed by the Obama administration after the election was over. Sanctions the Trump administration has continued, but that appear not to have negatively affected the Russian economy very much, or individuals. And so on a number of issues, Syria, Ukraine, election meddling, Russia has not changed its behavior at all, and yet it has won a summit with President Trump. The White House again today said it's necessary to talk to resolve differences and to find and forge alliances if they can be forged. But if you're the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, you're saying to yourself, I've not changed my behavior. I meddled in ways, or the country that I lead, the U.S. intelligence community alleges, did so with his direction, meddled in an American election as never before, and paid no discernible price. And even that, including a summit in the second year of the Trump presidency. So, viewed from that point of view, Russia is not the winner, but it certainly goes in with a bit of an edge.
All right. Major Garrett at the White House for us. Major, thank you.
Sure.